Nobody really teaches you this. You grow up learning equations, memorizing dates, conjugating verbs in languages you might barely remember 10 years later. But no one sits you down and explains one of the most important realities of human life. People learn how to treat you by watching how you treat yourself, not from a speech, not from a confrontation, not from a dramatic moment where you suddenly declare your worth. They learn it quietly, in the ordinary seconds of everyday life. Every time you laugh off something that actually bothered you. Every time you say yes when something in you clearly meant no. Every time you apologize for things that weren't really your responsibility. Those moments may feel small, but they aren't. Because each one becomes a signal, a small piece of information that teaches the people around you what your boundaries look like, what your standards are, and how much space you believe you deserve to occupy in the world. And here's the strange part. Most of this happens without anyone consciously realizing it. You're not giving a lecture on your value. You're writing a quiet instruction manual, one action at a time. The Stoics understood this long before psychology gave it a name. They believed respect was never something you demanded. It was something that emerged from patterns, from the way you carried yourself in moments when no one was paying particular attention, not in grand gestures, but in consistent behavior. And when you look closely, the people who are genuinely respected, not feared, not flattered, but truly respected, tend to live by a small set of habits, quiet ones, subtle ones, the kind most people overlook. Today, we're going to explore 9 of those behaviors, 9 ways people quietly teach the world how they expect to be treated, not through words, through patterns. Before we go any further, if you're done letting people underestimate you, type "done" in the comments, not as a performance, just as a decision. Because the truth is simple. You don't announce your worth. You demonstrate it. Before we move into the behaviors themselves, there is something important to understand about respect. Most people imagine respect as something dramatic, a moment where you finally stand up for yourself, a powerful speech, a confrontation that changes everything. But real respect almost never arrives that way. It grows slowly, quietly. It forms from patterns, small, repeated signals that show others how you relate to yourself. Because the truth is this, people rarely follow what you say about your worth. They follow what your behavior suggests about it. If you consistently doubt yourself, people learn to doubt you. If you constantly apologize for existing, people learn that your presence requires justification. If you tolerate disrespect repeatedly, people begin to treat that disrespect as normal, not always out of cruelty, often simply because they are following the cues you send. Human beings are remarkably attentive to patterns. We notice tone, posture, timing, the way someone reacts when tension appears. We notice who rushes to defend themselves, who shrinks in uncertain moments, who stays calm when pressure rises. And those observations slowly become conclusions. This is why worth is rarely something that can be forced through words. You cannot persuade people to respect you while behaving in ways that contradict the message. But the opposite is also true. When your behavior consistently reflects self-respect, the signal becomes difficult to ignore. Not because you demanded it, because you demonstrated it. The Stoics understood this deeply. They believed that the way you live, the way you respond to difficulty, attention, praise, conflict, communicates far more about you than any declaration ever could. Marcus Aurelius once wrote that the character of a person reveals itself in the smallest actions, not the performances, the habits. And that brings us to the behaviors themselves. 9 small patterns that quietly teach people how you expect to be treated. None of them require dramatic personality changes. None of them require becoming louder, harder, or more confrontational. They are simpler than that. But they are also more powerful. because each one adjusts the signal you send to the world. And the first one begins somewhere most people overlook entirely, with the promises you make to yourself. Behavior 1. You keep promises to yourself. There is a version of you that has made hundreds of quiet promises, not to other people, to yourself. I'll wake up earlier tomorrow. I'll finish that project. I won't tolerate that again. I'm going to change this. Small commitments, private ones, the kind nobody else hears, which is exactly why they matter so much. Because the way you keep your word to yourself quietly builds the foundation of how you move through the world. When those promises are repeatedly broken, something subtle begins to happen. You start trusting your own words less, not consciously, but internally. A small gap forms between intention and action. You say you'll do something, and a quiet part of you already doubts it. And that internal doubt leaks outward, not in some mystical way. In the ordinary language of behavior, people notice when your actions consistently follow through, and they notice when they don't. When your words and your behavior live in different places, something about your presence becomes less solid. Not weak, just uncertain. Epictetus believed self-mastery started here, not with grand philosophies or complicated systems, but with alignment. A person whose inner commitments and outward actions match. Someone whose yes means yes, and whose no means no. Starting with themselves. When you keep a promise you made privately, the walk you said you'd take, the boundary you said you'd hold, the task you said you'd finish, you're not just completing something on a checklist. You're building evidence. Evidence that your word carries weight. Evidence that you are someone who follows through. That kind of internal reliability changes the way you carry yourself. Your decisions become clearer, your posture steadier, your boundaries easier to maintain. Because you know, deep down, that when you say something matters, you will act accordingly. And people notice that. Not through announcements, through consistency. They see someone whose commitments are real, someone whose intentions actually lead somewhere, someone who doesn't casually abandon their own standards. Trust begins there, first internally, then externally, which is why this behavior sits at the foundation of everything else. Break your word to yourself often enough, and the structure above it starts to wobble. Honor it quietly, and something about you becomes unmistakably solid. And once that solidity begins to appear, another habit naturally follows. You stop feeling the need to explain every decision you make. Behavior. 2. You don't over-explain. Pay attention to what happens the next time you say no to something. Most people don't stop at the word itself. They say no, and then immediately begin building a long explanation around it. First comes the reason, then a second reason to reinforce the first, then a small apology wrapped around both of them, and finally, reassurance that declining doesn't mean they're a bad person. By the end of it, the original answer has almost disappeared beneath the layers of justification. The word no is still technically there, but it's buried. Over-explaining is one of the most common ways people quietly signal uncertainty about their own choices. It often looks like politeness. It feels like consideration. But underneath it is usually something simpler, a need for approval. When someone explains every decision in excessive detail, they're not just giving information. They're asking for permission. They're hoping the other person will agree that the decision was acceptable. And when that pattern repeats often enough, people begin to expect it. They begin to assume that your boundaries require negotiation, that your decisions are open for debate, that your no might still become a yes if the conversation continues long enough. But calm certainty communicates something very different. When someone answers clearly and simply, without a defensive tone, without an elaborate explanation, the signal changes. It says, "This decision was made thoughtfully." It doesn't require external validation. It stands on its own. There is a concept in Japanese aesthetics called ma. It refers to the meaningful space between things, the silence between notes in music, the pause in conversation, the intentional absence that gives shape to what is present. Western culture often rushes to fill that space, but silence and brevity carry their own kind of authority. A simple sentence can hold surprising strength. I won't be able to attend. I'm not available for that. I've decided to focus elsewhere. Warmth can still exist there. Kindness can still exist there. But the message remains clear. The decision doesn't require a defense. And when people consistently communicate this way, something subtle shifts. Their words begin to carry more weight. Because they're not diluted by constant justification, their choices appear more intentional, more settled, more self-assured. The real work here isn't learning how to construct better explanations. It's learning to need fewer of them. Because when you trust your own decision, you no longer feel the need to convince everyone else that it was valid. And the people around you begin to sense that trust as well, which leads naturally to another behavior that communicates quiet strength, the ability to sit with uncomfortable moments without rushing to erase them. Behavior 3. You allow discomfort to exist. Most people are deeply uncomfortable with tension. An awkward silence appears in a conversation and someone immediately fills it. A disagreement surfaces and someone rushes to smooth it over. A difficult truth enters the room and suddenly everyone is searching for the fastest way to make the moment feel normal again. The instinct is understandable. Human beings are wired to avoid social friction. We want the air to feel light. We want harmony. But in the rush to restore comfort, something else often happens. People start fixing things that were never broken. They apologize when they weren't wrong. They soften statements that needed to remain clear. They absorb responsibility for emotions that were never theirs to carry. All because the tension of the moment felt too uncomfortable to sit with. And when that pattern repeats often enough, it quietly teaches others something important. It teaches them that the discomfort will always be resolved quickly, usually by you, no matter who caused it. But people who are deeply respected tend to behave differently, not aggressively, not confrontationally, just steadily. They allow the moment to exist. If a silence appears, they don't scramble to fill it. If someone reacts emotionally, they don't immediately rush to neutralize the atmosphere. If a difficult truth lands in the conversation, they allow it to settle instead of trying to cushion every edge. This isn't about becoming rigid or cold. It's about becoming comfortable with reality. Marcus Aurelius wrote often about the discipline of responding only to what truly requires a response, not to every sensation of urgency. And discomfort often disguises itself as urgency. It feels like something must be done immediately. But most of the time, nothing actually needs fixing. It simply needs space. When you allow that space to exist, people notice something different about your presence. You're not easily rattled. You're not scrambling to restore equilibrium. You're steady. You can remain in a difficult moment without dissolving into anxiety or rushing toward escape. And that steadiness communicates something powerful. It says, I am not fragile. I do not require every moment to feel smooth in order to remain grounded. I can stay present even when the atmosphere becomes heavy. That quiet resilience builds a different kind of respect. Because people instinctively trust those who can remain composed in difficult moments, not because they dominate the situation, but because they can endure it. And once you learn to hold tension without immediately resolving it, another shift begins to happen. You stop shrinking away from positive attention as well. You learn to receive recognition without instinctively pushing it away, which leads to the next behavior. Behavior 4. You accept praise without deflecting. Someone compliments you. Maybe it's about your work, something you handled well, something you built, solved, or contributed. And before they even finish the sentence, something automatic happens. You deflect. Oh, it was nothing. Anyone could have done that. I actually almost messed the whole thing up. You laugh a little. You shift the attention away. You shrink the moment down to something smaller than it was. It feels polite. It feels humble. But very often, it isn't humility. It's discomfort. Many people have learned, consciously or not, that accepting praise feels dangerous, as if acknowledging something positive about yourself might somehow cross the line into arrogance. So they reject the compliment before it fully lands. But something subtle happens when you do that. You're not just minimizing yourself. You're also quietly rejecting the experience of the person offering the compliment. They saw something valuable. They appreciated it. They took a moment to express it. And when the response immediately dismisses it, the message becomes unclear. It suggests their perception might be mistaken, or exaggerated, or unnecessary. Over time, that pattern begins to shape how people communicate appreciation toward you, because the way you receive positive attention teaches others how comfortable you are being seen. People who are quietly respected tend to do something simpler. They receive the moment, not dramatically, not with performance, just clearly. Thank you, I appreciate that. That's it. No immediate deflection, no self-criticism wrapped around the response, no attempt to redirect the spotlight somewhere else, just a clean acknowledgement. 2 seconds where you allow the recognition to exist, where you let someone's positive experience of you remain intact. Receiving praise with calm acceptance communicates something important. It shows that you are not threatened by being seen positively. It shows that you are comfortable occupying the space where good work is recognized. And when you consistently allow that space to exist, people begin to mirror that perception. They start to see you the way you allow yourself to be seen. Not inflated, not exaggerated, simply capable, comfortable with your contributions. Someone who belongs in moments of appreciation just as naturally as in moments of effort. But learning to receive recognition also leads to another shift. Because once you stop shrinking away from praise, you start noticing something else. How often people unconsciously shrink their presence in everyday situations, which brings us to the next behavior. Behavior 5. You stop shrinking in rooms. Most people know what it feels like to shrink. You walk into a room where you're not completely sure you belong. A meeting, a conversation with confident personalities, a space where everyone else seems more certain than you feel. And something subtle happens. You sit slightly farther back than necessary. You speak a little more quietly than your natural voice. You hesitate before finishing a thought. Sometimes, you even apologize for things that don't require apology. Sorry if this is a stupid question. Sorry, just one quick thing. Sorry to interrupt. None of these behaviors feel dramatic. They're small adjustments, but together, they send a powerful signal. They quietly suggest that your presence might require permission, that you're not entirely sure the space belongs to you. And people tend to take that signal at face value, not out of cruelty, simply because human beings instinctively follow cues. Body language is a language, posture is a message, tone is information. When someone enters a room looking like they're unsure they should be there, others unconsciously respond to that uncertainty. But the people who are consistently respected rarely try to dominate a room. They don't perform confidence loudly. They simply arrive. They sit fully at the table. They speak at their normal volume. They allow their presence to exist without apologizing for it. There's no performance in it, no exaggerated assertiveness, just steadiness. Seneca often wrote about the freedom that comes from living without constant concern for how one appears to others. Not indifference, but independence. The ability to show up as yourself without endlessly adjusting your posture, your voice, your energy to gain approval. And that kind of presence changes the atmosphere around you, because when someone stops negotiating their right to occupy space, others begin to accept that presence naturally. You're not forcing attention, you're not competing for it, you're simply participating fully, which is often far more powerful. When you stop shrinking physically, verbally, and emotionally, something shifts. Your thoughts carry more weight, your contributions land more clearly, and the room begins to treat you accordingly. But claiming your space isn't only about how you show up. It's also about recognizing when certain spaces, certain relationships, certain roles no longer belong in your life at all, which leads to the next behavior. Behavior 6. You let go of what has already ended. Some things in life end long before we admit that they have. A friendship that now runs mostly on habit, a role you once loved but quietly outgrew, a relationship that slowly drained the warmth it once had. The signs usually appear gradually. Conversations become shorter, energy fades. What once felt natural begins to feel forced. But many people continue holding on, not because the connection is still alive, because letting go feels uncomfortable. Ending something requires clarity, and clarity often means acknowledging a truth we would rather avoid. So instead, we maintain the appearance of continuity. We continue the conversations. We continue the routines. We continue playing a role that stopped fitting us long ago. From the outside, it may look like loyalty, but internally, it often becomes something different. A quiet form of self-abandonment. When you remain in situations that have clearly run their course, you send an unspoken signal. You communicate that your time, your energy, your attention will continue to be available, even when the exchange has stopped being meaningful. And over time, people begin to treat that availability as permanent. Not intentionally, simply because the pattern suggests it. But people who carry a strong sense of self-respect eventually learn a different skill. They recognize endings, not dramatically, not with anger or accusations, just honestly. They notice when something has already completed its natural cycle, and instead of forcing it to continue, they allow it to close. Sometimes that looks like a conversation growing quieter. Sometimes it means stepping away from a role that no longer reflects who you are. Sometimes it means reducing your presence where your energy is no longer valued. The Stoics understood that life moves in seasons. Seneca often wrote about the importance of recognizing when something has fulfilled its purpose, not clinging to it out of nostalgia or obligation, but releasing it with dignity, because holding on to what has already ended drains attention from what still has life in it. When you begin to let go of situations that no longer belong to you, something important becomes visible to others. They see that your presence is not automatic, it is intentional. It is offered where it is meaningful and withdrawn where it is not. That clarity communicates something powerful about your worth. Your time is finite, your energy is finite, and where you choose to place those things matters. But even when you leave certain situations behind, there will always be moments when conflict, criticism, or pressure enters the picture, and how you handle those moments sends one of the strongest signals of all. Which brings us to the next behavior. Behavior 7. You respond instead of react. Someone says something that immediately irritates you. Maybe it's dismissive, maybe it's unfair, maybe it touches a nerve you weren't expecting. You feel the reaction instantly. Your heart rate rises, your thoughts sharpen. Words begin forming before the other person has even finished speaking. Every instinct pushes you to answer immediately, to correct them, to defend yourself, to match their energy. That impulse is completely human. Almost everyone feels it. But acting on it every single time quietly hands your control to someone else. Because reacting means allowing the moment and the person who created it to dictate your next move. It turns your behavior into a reflex. And reflexes rarely reflect your best judgment. Responding is different. Responding begins with a pause. Sometimes it's only a few seconds. A small space where you resist the urge to speak immediately. In that brief moment, something important happens. Your emotional reaction settles just enough for your reasoning mind to arrive. You regain the ability to choose your response instead of simply releasing it. The Stoics built an entire philosophy around this small gap. Epictetus taught that events themselves are rarely the problem. What shapes our lives is how we interpret and respond to them. And that interpretation only becomes possible when we slow down enough to create distance between the stimulus and the reaction. Most people never develop this space. They react instantly, then explain the reaction afterward. Sometimes they regret both. But when someone consistently pauses, when they choose their words carefully instead of firing them off impulsively, something different becomes visible. Self-possession. They appear calm under pressure, not because nothing affects them, but because they refuse to surrender their response to the moment. And that kind of composure earns a unique form of respect. People begin to see you as someone who is difficult to destabilize, someone whose reactions cannot easily be manipulated, someone who moves deliberately instead of impulsively. Of course, no one does this perfectly. There will always be moments when emotion arrives faster than reflection. But the practice is what matters. Returning again and again to that pause, strengthening the space where your response is chosen, not triggered. And as that habit grows, it begins to influence another important area of your life. Because once you stop reacting to every demand placed on your attention, you start protecting something far more valuable: your time. Which brings us to the next behavior. Behavior 8. You protect your time. Time is one of the few resources that cannot be replaced. Money can be earned again. Opportunities can return. Skills can be rebuilt. But time only moves in one direction. And yet many people treat their time as if it were endlessly renewable. They say yes to requests they barely considered. They allow interruptions to fragment their focus. They answer messages the moment they arrive, no matter what they were doing before. Little by little, their day becomes shaped by other people's priorities. Not maliciously, simply by default. When someone appears constantly available, constantly responsive, constantly ready to shift their attention, a quiet conclusion begins to form. Their time must not be very scarce, because scarcity creates value, and availability, when it is unlimited, quietly lowers perceived importance. People who carry a strong sense of self-worth approach their time differently, not selfishly, but intentionally. They understand that attention is the currency of life. Where you place it determines what grows. When you give your time carelessly, you dilute your ability to focus on what matters most, and others quickly become accustomed to that openness. But when you begin protecting your time, scheduling it deliberately, limiting unnecessary interruptions, declining commitments that do not align with your priorities, something changes. Your presence becomes more concentrated, more deliberate, more meaningful, because it is no longer scattered across everything that asks for it. The Stoics were deeply aware of this. Seneca once wrote that life is long enough for great accomplishments if it is used wisely. The problem, he said, is that people treat time as if it were abundant. They guard their money carefully, but they hand away their days without hesitation. When you begin treating your time as something valuable, others begin noticing that shift. They see someone who cannot be pulled endlessly in every direction, someone who chooses carefully where their energy goes. And that intentionality communicates something powerful. Your life has direction. Your attention has limits. And those limits are not negotiable simply because someone else asks. But even more powerful than protecting your time is knowing when to withdraw your presence entirely. Because sometimes the strongest signal of self-respect is not how you stay, it's how you leave. Which brings us to the final behavior. Behavior 9. You walk away from disrespect. At some point, everyone faces a moment where they are treated in a way that doesn't sit right. It might not be loud, it might not be obvious to everyone else in the room, but internally you recognize it. A comment that crosses a line, a pattern of dismissal, a tone that slowly erodes your sense of dignity. In those moments, many people try to solve the problem through explanation. They argue. They justify themselves. They try to convince the other person to see things differently. Sometimes that conversation is necessary, but often the deeper truth is simpler. Respect that must constantly be negotiated is rarely stable. People learn how far they can go by observing what is tolerated. If disrespect is repeatedly absorbed, minimized, or ignored, the pattern quietly becomes acceptable. Not because anyone formally agreed to it, because behavior created the precedent. This is why one of the strongest signals of self-worth is the ability to leave. Not dramatically, not with anger, not with a speech designed to prove a point. Simply by withdrawing your presence from situations that repeatedly violate your standards. Walking away can take many forms. Sometimes it's physical distance, sometimes it's emotional distance, sometimes it's a gradual reduction in how much energy you invest in a dynamic that has stopped being healthy. The Stoics often spoke about dignity as something that must be protected internally first. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself frequently that the opinions or behavior of others could not diminish his character unless he allowed them to dictate his own responses. When you walk away from repeated disrespect, you communicate something that words alone rarely achieve. You show that your presence is not unconditional. It is not guaranteed. It exists where mutual respect exists. And when that condition disappears, so do you. This doesn't require hostility. It doesn't require resentment. It simply requires clarity. Your time, your attention, your energy, these things have value, and they are not meant to remain indefinitely in environments where that value is ignored. Over time, people learn something important from this behavior. Your standards are real, not because you announced them, because you enforced them quietly, and that quiet consistency teaches the most powerful lesson of all. Your worth is not something you argue for. It is something you live. None of these behaviors are dramatic. There is no single moment where everything suddenly changes. No speech, no confrontation, no instant transformation. That's what makes this process both challenging and powerful. Because worth is not built through declarations. It is built through patterns. Keeping promises to yourself, speaking clearly without constant justification, remaining steady in uncomfortable moments, receiving appreciation without shrinking, taking up your space without apology, letting go of what has already ended, responding thoughtfully instead of reacting impulsively, protecting your time, walking away from disrespect. Individually, each behavior seems small, but repeated consistently, they begin to shape something larger, your identity. And when that identity becomes clear enough, people around you begin adjusting their expectations, not because you demanded respect, but because your behavior made your self-respect unmistakable. The Stoics believed that the most powerful form of influence was not persuasion. It was example. Living in a way that quietly communicates your standards until the message becomes impossible to misunderstand. You cannot control whether every person will value you, but you can make one thing very clear: you value yourself, and that clarity changes everything. So start with one behavior, not all 9, just one. Practice it until it becomes natural, then let the next one follow. Because the lesson people learn about your worth is the one you teach them through your actions. If something in this message resonated with you, write "I know my worth" in the comments. No explanation needed. Share this with someone who needs to hear it too. And if you want to continue learning how to carry yourself with calm strength and clarity, consider subscribing and turning on notifications. There's much more ahead. Until next time, walk steady.